Kenya. You've seen it on postcards, sunlit savannas, lion silhouettes, marathon runners with fire in their stride. But this land isn't famous for what's on the surface. No. What makes Kenya extraordinary lies deep beneath skin and soil, in the DNA that's older than the pyramids, older than language itself. When scientists map the story of human origins, they don't draw straight lines. They draw circles. And the center of that circle? Right here. East Africa. Kenya. Fossils of Homo sapiens, dated nearly 200,000 years old, have been pulled from Rift Valley soil like buried time capsules. But bones tell one kind of story. Genes, they tell another, a story without gaps, without myths. Only truth. Have you ever wondered where the oldest versions of you might live? Not metaphorically, literally. Because inside your cells, no matter who you are, is a whisper from Kenya. But this isn't just about age. It's about depth. See, when geneticists analyzed thousands of DNA samples globally, they found something shocking. The genetic variation within a single Kenyan community, say, the Luya of Webai, is greater than the genetic difference between a Frenchman and a Japanese. Think about that for a second. Two people from the same village in western Kenya may be more genetically different from each other than any two people from across Europe and Asia. Why? Because Kenya isn't a population, it's a convergence. A crossroad of ancient migrations, where every route led, and few ended. Other parts of the world were chapters. Kenya was the preface. And the science backs this up with brutal clarity. Researchers from the 1000 Genomes Project and H3 Africa sequenced the genomes of thousands of East Africans. What they found wasn't just diversity. It was data that rewrites global reference panels. Variants found in Kenya weren't just unknown. They were unaccounted for. Imagine discovering entire sentences in the human genetic code that the rest of the world didn't even know existed. You may have heard about mitochondrial Eve, the theoretical common matrilineal ancestor of all humans. She didn't live in Europe. She didn't live in Asia. She lived in a place with red earth and sharp sun, likely right here. But what does this feel like if you're Kenyan? Imagine walking the same paths your DNA has walked for tens of thousands of years. Imagine knowing that your blood holds more history than any museum on Earth. That's not myth. That's measurable. Even the air here carries memory. The Great Rift Valley isn't just a scenic backdrop. It's a fault line that's witnessed more evolutionary milestones than any other region on the planet. When we talk about the Cradle of Humanity, it's not poetic. It's geological. It's genetic. So, the next time you look at a map of Africa and see that familiar hump, that sweeping horn, remember that beneath those curves is the closest thing we have to a biological origin point. Kenya is where the lineages stayed behind while others left, some to Europe, some to Asia, some to Australia. And yet, the deepest roots remained. Kenyan DNA isn't just unique, it's primary. It holds more ancestral branches, more divergence, more evolutionary clues than anywhere else on Earth. Which means if you're studying genetics and you're not studying Kenya, you're missing the beginning of the book. And in that genome, we don't just see who Kenyans are. We see who we all were before migrations, before separation, before the forgetting began. Imagine you're standing in the Kenyan highlands, feeling the wind brush past your skin. But what if I told you that same wind once carried languages, livestock, and legacies from thousands of kilometers away? Kenya was never an island. It was a magnet. Long before history was written, people moved, not as tourists, not as conquerors, but as survivors. And every migration that cut across the African continent somehow passed through Kenya. Today, more than 40 ethnic groups call Kenya home. But these aren't just cultural distinctions. They're genetic signatures. And when scientists decode those signatures, they find overlapping migrations stacked like sediment, each layer telling a different story of who came, who stayed, and who became part of something new. Let's rewind about 5,000 years. From the northeast, Cushitic-speaking herders entered what's now northern Kenya, bringing not just cattle, but Middle Eastern genetic signals. Yes, the Horn of Africa was already a bridge, and Kenya was the welcome mat. Then came the Nilotes, tall, pastoral, river-following people who arrived from the southern Nile Valley. They didn't just mix in, they reshaped the gene pool. Their Y chromosome lineages, traced directly to Northeast Africa. Their mitochondrial DNA, rooted in East Africa itself. A story told by fathers and mothers, braided into every cell. And then the Bantu. About 2,000 years ago, a new pulse of migration surged from West Central Africa. These were agriculturalists, and with them came new languages, new tools, and new DNA. The Bantu expansion was one of the most significant human movements in history, and when they reached Kenya, they didn't erase what came before. They merged. The Kikuyu, Luya, and Meru today carry strong West African markers, but dig deeper, and you'll find layers of older East African ancestry, even hints of ancient hunter-gatherers who once roamed these valleys. You see, Kenyan DNA isn't linear. It's not a family tree. It's a woven fabric, one where the threads are people and the knots are stories. Every Kenyan genome is a time-lapse photo of migrations colliding, embracing, and enduring. But how do we know this? Because modern genetics doesn't just ask, "Who are you?" It asks, "Who traveled through you?" In northern Kenya, a 2022 study compared 4 neighboring ethnic groups: the Rendille, Samburu, Turkana, and Borana. These weren't just close on a map, they were genetically braided. Even within the Turkana, there were fine-scale differences based on territory. Not language, not identity. Geography shaped their genes more than tradition ever could. So the borders we see today, they're recent, arbitrary. But the borders in our blood, they're ancient, fluid, and drawn by movement, not politics. Why does this matter? Because when you understand how many civilizations moved through Kenya, you realize it's not just a nation. It's a genetic crossroads. Arab traders, Indian Ocean sailors, Middle Eastern herders, they all left a fingerprint. Even in coastal Kenyan groups like the Mijikenda, DNA shows traces of Persian and South Asian ancestry introduced just 1,000 years ago. That's not ancient history. That's recent memory written in molecules. And if all this feels complex, it's because it is. Kenyan identity was never pure, because purity is a myth. What exists instead is a brilliant mosaic, forged by footsteps across deserts, mountains, and seas. Ask yourself this. What if the story of humanity wasn't built by empires and kings, but by herders, sailors, mothers, and migrants who carried not only tools and languages, but genomes? When we zoom out, Kenyan DNA becomes more than unique. It becomes a mirror of migration itself, a living archive of motion, mixing, and adaptation. So the next time someone says, "Where are you from?" remember that in Kenya, the answer is never simple. It's never singular. It's an echo of 1,000 journeys stitched into a single people. Look at a map of Kenya. See those shifting landscapes? The parched north, the lush western highlands, the coastal plains kissed by the Indian Ocean? Now imagine this. What if the ground you walk on doesn't just shape the way you live, but who you are, down to your DNA? In Kenya, geography isn't background. It's biological architecture. Across the arid plains of Turkana, the savannas of Samburu, the volcanic ridges of the Rift Valley, genes aren't spread evenly. They move with rivers, with mountains, with footsteps, and sometimes they stop moving entirely. Let me take you to a moment scientists didn't expect. They gathered DNA from 4 neighboring ethnic groups in northern Kenya. People who speak different languages, wear different clothes, follow different customs. But the surprise? The closer they lived, the more alike their DNA. And it wasn't about language or culture. It was location. Rendille and Samburu, once thought distinct, turned out to be genetic cousins. Why? Intermarriage, proximity, shared wells, shared struggle. And that changed everything scientists assumed. It challenges our very idea of identity. Are we shaped more by who we say we are, or by where we stand? Even within the Turkana people, one ethnic group, one name, researchers found subtle genetic differences tied to territorial sections. Think about that. A few kilometers apart, and your genome starts whispering a different accent. This is what makes Kenyan DNA so profound. It tells us that genes don't respect tribal lines. They follow terrain. Have you ever considered that a mountain could be a genetic barrier? Or that a marriage across a valley might rewrite your children's ancestry? It happens here, and it's written in the alleles. And here's where it gets deeper. In the lowland zones, Near Lake Victoria or the Indian Ocean, people carry higher frequencies of the sickle cell allele. Why? Malaria. The swampy, humid climate is paradise for mosquitoes, and over centuries, the human body adapted. Move inland, to the high-altitude areas where malaria fades, and that gene fades too. This isn't myth. It's measurable. It's happening in real time, across your blood, across elevation. And it doesn't stop there. Highland dwellers like the Kikuyu or Embu show lower malaria resistance alleles, but they exhibit other traits, subtle adaptations to cooler air, thinner oxygen. So imagine a traveler walking from the coast to the mountains. With every step, the genome around them shifts. It's like crossing invisible genetic borders, not marked by flags, but by forests and rainfall. In Kenya, topography is destiny. But here's the part that changes everything. Culture often fails to keep pace. We think of people in boxes, Bantu, Nilote, Kushite, but the DNA doesn't care. A Cushitic-speaking group might carry Nilotic mitochondrial DNA because of 1,000 years of marriage between neighbors. A Bantu child might have genes that trace back to ancient foragers who no longer exist. So how do you map identity when the land keeps rewriting it? That's the brilliance of Kenyan genetics. It forces us to abandon our assumptions. It says, you are not your label, you are your landscape. Even modern urbanization hasn't erased this. Nairobi is a melting pot, yes, but genetic echoes of people's home regions still linger in their blood. It's not just what city you're born in. It's what hill your grandmother climbed, what river your ancestors crossed during drought, what altitude your lineage adapted to survive. This is why Kenyan DNA can't be generalized. It can't be boxed. It's as diverse and dynamic as the terrain itself. When we look at a genetic map of Kenya, we don't see lines, we see gradients. Color flows like water across topography. The genes don't stop at tribal boundaries. They blur. They blend. And in that blend, we find truth. Blood remembers. It carries your past like a secret, wrapped in molecules shaped not just by who you are, but by what your ancestors fought to survive. In Kenya, that fight was never abstract. It was brutal. It was daily. And it left behind signatures in the genome that read like scars turned into superpowers. Let's start with a cruel paradox. A mutation that distorts red blood cells, yet saves lives. The sickle cell trait. It's common in western Kenya, especially near Lake Victoria. But why would a gene that can cause pain, organ failure, even death, survive generation after generation? The answer is terrifying and brilliant. Malaria. If you carry just one copy of the sickle mutation, your chances of dying from malaria drop dramatically. In regions where mosquitoes kill more than wars, this tiny twist in the DNA became a genetic shield. Nature made a trade. Pain for survival. And it worked. But it's not just sickle cell. Look closer at Kenyan coastlines, Mombasa, Kilifi, Lamu, and you'll find another adaptation. G6PD deficiency. It protects red blood cells from being invaded by the Plasmodium parasite. But again, there's a price. People with this condition can't eat fava beans. Certain medications can trigger dangerous reactions. Still, the body held on to it, because in the battle against malaria, even imperfect weapons are better than none. And this is the pattern. The Kenyan genome isn't clean. It's carved, chiseled, hardened by generations of biochemical war. Now move to Nairobi. You're in a modern city, maybe sipping coffee in Westlands, but not far from here. A very different kind of resistance story unfolded. In the 1990s, researchers began studying sex workers in Nairobi who, despite years of exposure to HIV, remained uninfected. Not once. Not ever. At first, no one believed it. But genetic sequencing told a different story. These women carried unique combinations of HLA genes, immune system markers that helped them recognize HIV and mount an attack before the virus could gain a foothold. Their T cells were armed and ready, naturally. No vaccine, no cure, just evolution in real time. Ask yourself, how many more genetic defenses lie hidden in Kenyan populations? What else are we missing by not studying African genomes in full depth? Because here's the truth. Adaptation isn't something from the past. It's happening now. Every generation, every outbreak, every breath. Even diet has shaped survival. The Maasai, for example, eat a diet that would terrify any cardiologist: milk, meat, blood. And yet, they show low levels of cardiovascular disease. Genomic scans revealed why. Variants in genes like FABP1 and CYP3A help metabolize fat and regulate cholesterol. These aren't just nutritional quirks. They're metabolic armor, sculpted over centuries of pastoral life. That means the Maasai didn't just inherit their livestock, they inherited the genes to survive off them. Let that sink in. Your environment isn't just outside you, it rewrites you. It shapes your bloodstream. It decides which mutations survive and which disappear forever. In Kenya, this process has left behind genetic signatures more intense than almost anywhere on Earth. Why? Because the selective pressures here, malaria, HIV, limited diet, high altitude, were relentless. If your genes couldn't adapt, you died. Simple, final, unforgiving. But somehow, across all this pressure, something remarkable happened. Not only did people survive, they evolved advantages. It's as if every epidemic, every drought, every bite of contaminated food forced the genome to become sharper, faster, stronger. And the proof is in the alleles. This isn't mythology. This is measurable, repeatable, peer-reviewed. So the next time someone says Africa is genetically diverse, remember, that's not just about beauty. It's about survival etched into bloodlines. The Kenyan genome is not fragile. It's a fortress, one built through centuries of hardship, with defenses hidden in plain sight. Milk. It sounds so ordinary, doesn't it? But in parts of Kenya, that simple white liquid is nothing less than a genetic battleground, a symbol of survival, culture, and something far more astonishing: human evolution happening in real time. Most mammals, including humans, lose the ability to digest milk after childhood. That's biology's default setting. Lactase, the enzyme that breaks down lactose, shuts off. Because in a wild environment, milk is for infants. Adults don't need it. Except, what happens when milk becomes central to your way of life? Not just food, but fuel in droughts, in displacement, in desert heat? You change, or you disappear. Enter the Maasai, the Kalenjin, the Samburu, pastoralist communities whose entire livelihood revolved around livestock. For thousands of years, their diet centered on milk, meat, and blood. And slowly, quietly, the impossible happened. Their DNA rewired itself to keep producing lactase into adulthood. And not just through luck, through pressure, through selection. A specific mutation, known as -14010*C, appeared in the regulatory region near the LCT gene. It didn't come from Europe. It wasn't borrowed. It was Kenya's own solution to a challenge no one else had solved quite this way. By today, over half the Maasai population carries this allele. That's not random. That's natural selection, on full display, in a single trait, visible on breakfast tables across East Africa. Now pause and think. How many other places on Earth can we see evolution that recent, that targeted, and that transformative? Europe has its own lactase mutation, the -13910*T allele, but genetic studies show the East African signal is even stronger in terms of selection sweep. That means the benefit of digesting milk was so critical, it left a sharper mark on the Kenyan genome than anywhere in the world. We're talking about one of the strongest positive selection events ever recorded in humans. And it's tied not to war or plague or famine, but to the need to sip milk under an African sun. This isn't just adaptation. It's a cultural trait encoded in biology. What makes it even more compelling is that the East African lactase persistence didn't evolve in one place and spread. It evolved independently. A textbook case of convergent evolution, where different human groups, under similar environmental pressures, developed the same function via different genetic routes. In other words, Kenya didn't copy anyone. It innovated. The pastoralist genome adapted to milk, while the rest of the world, especially large parts of Asia and Southern Africa, remained largely lactose intolerant. Globally, being able to drink milk as an adult is the exception, not the rule. But for millions of Kenyans, it's normal, thanks to a mutation that didn't exist a few thousand years ago. And yet, this adaptation isn't just about milk. It overlaps with something else: cholesterol metabolism. The same genes that allow for high dairy consumption also carry variants that help regulate fat processing, particularly in the Maasai. It's like their genome evolved in multiple layers to support this high-calorie, animal-based diet. How did researchers discover this? By sequencing Kenyan genomes and comparing them to global databases. What they found wasn't just a mutation. It was a metabolic blueprint for survival in a pastoral ecosystem. Genes like RAB3-GAP1 and FABP1, linked to lipid metabolism, showed signals of selection in these groups, hinting at an integrated genetic strategy to thrive on milk and meat. And this changes how we think about nutrition entirely. Modern diets tell us to fear fat, to limit dairy. But Kenyan pastoralist DNA says, if you live a certain way, if your ancestors did for long enough, your genome will make a different rulebook. So when we look at a glass of milk in a Maasai homestead, we're not just seeing food. We're seeing 4,000 years of adaptation frozen in time. We're seeing a genetic rebellion against the norm. And it all started with a question. What happens when survival depends on something your body was never designed to digest? In Kenya, the answer came back clear. You adapt. You evolve. You rewrite the code. There's a stretch of road in Kenya where legends are made. It winds through the highlands of Iton. Altitude 2,400 meters, oxygen scarce, wind sharp. And on that road, barefoot kids run against the horizon. Some of them will grow up to win Olympic gold. But how? Why here? This isn't just about training. It never was. The Kalenjin, a Nilotic-speaking people native to the Rift Valley, have produced an astonishing percentage of the world's elite long-distance runners. We're not talking about talent. We're talking about biological precision, the kind that can't be coached. Start with the legs. Studies show that Kalenjin runners have an unusually low limb mass relative to their height, long, narrow legs, thin ankles, and calves that swing like pendulums. That means less energy needed per step, less weight to lift. Every stride is engineered for efficiency, but it doesn't stop at anatomy. Genetic scans reveal small variations in dozens of genes tied to oxygen usage, mitochondrial efficiency, and calcium handling in muscle fibers. These aren't dramatic mutations. They're fine-tuned enhancements, a slow layering of advantage, passed down like family recipes. Can a genome be built for endurance? In Kenya, it already has been. And there's more. Many East African runners grow up at high altitudes, where oxygen levels are low. Their bodies respond by developing larger lung volumes, higher hemoglobin counts, and more red blood cells, even before they've run a single race. It's not just training at altitude. It's being raised by it. But let's not ignore the mind. Because endurance isn't just legs and lungs. It's pain. It's threshold. And here, cultural tradition steps in. Among the Kalenjin, young men undergo initiation rites that demand silence under extreme pain. A cut, a burn, a test of mental fortitude. You don't cry. You don't flinch. You endure. And that mentality bleeds into sport. When Western coaches come to Kenya, they often assume success lies in some magical coaching formula. But ask a local trainer, and you'll hear something else. We don't teach them to run, they say. We remove the reasons they might stop. Let's talk numbers. At one point, 17 of the world's top 25 marathon times were held by Kenyans, most of them Kalenjin. In elite races, when you check the top finishers, it's not a flag or a name you see. It's a pattern. It's a population. But how is this possible? Could it be that the same population that once tracked cattle across hundreds of miles in the Rift Valley has, over millennia, selected for those who could run farthest, survive longest, and recover fastest? And if so, are we watching sport? Or are we watching evolution in motion? Because science is catching up. A study comparing Kalenjin and Aramo runners, two East African groups dominating global distance records, found distinctive gene expression in muscle fiber pathways. One researcher said, "This isn't about one magic gene. It's about a symphony of small advantages, all tuned for endurance." That's the key. It's not a superpower. It's 100 small advantages that, together, break records. Now zoom out. There are countries with more money, more infrastructure, more medals. But there's nowhere on Earth where running is so intertwined with identity. Here, it's not a sport. It's ancestry expressed through motion. Even the terrain helps. Rift Valley roads are uneven, hilly, unpredictable, a natural treadmill for biomechanical efficiency. You learn to run light, land softly, waste nothing. And every child who runs to school, 5 kilometers each way, isn't training. They're just living the rhythm that made their DNA legendary. So next time you watch a Kenyan athlete surge ahead on the final stretch of a marathon, remember, you're not just watching muscle. You're watching thousands of years of adaptation, hardship, and cultural fire condensed into stride. That's not coincidence. That's the endurance enigma. The human body has one canvas that never lies, skin. And in Kenya, that canvas is more than color. It's history. It's science. It's migration written in melanin. If you travel from Turkana in the northwest to the coastal plains of Lamu, you'll notice something remarkable. The spectrum of skin tones doesn't follow tribal lines. It follows ancestral shadows. Every pigment, every undertone, tells a story that began long before borders, before language, even before farming. Let's begin where the sun hits hardest. In the semi-arid savannas of northern Kenya, many Nilotic populations, like the Turkana and Maasai, have some of the darkest skin tones on Earth. But this isn't about shade. It's about survival. Studies have found that these groups carry a unique variant in a gene called MFSD12, a mutation that boosts melanin production to shield the body from the brutal ultraviolet radiation of the equator. This isn't cosmetic. It's life-saving. Darker skin reduces the risk of DNA damage, skin cancer, and folate degradation, all essential to reproductive health. So yes, depigmentation here is beautiful, but it's also genetic armor. But then something unexpected shows up. Among some Kenyan Cushitic-speaking groups, especially in the northeast and coast, researchers began detecting a lighter skin allele known as SLC24A5. That same mutation is common in Southern Europeans and parts of the Middle East. What was it doing in East Africa? The answer? Admixture. Thousands of years ago, long before ships carried colonizers, they carried traders, and before that, pastoralists moved down from the Horn of Africa, mingling with local populations. Their genes left traces. The SLC24A5 variant, likely introduced through Afroasiatic migrants with Eurasian backflow, didn't dominate, but it stayed. And in some communities, it blended with the local palate. What you get isn't uniformity, it's gradient. Kenya isn't black or brown or light. It's a living spectrum, shaped by both sunlight and story. And the deeper you look, the more complex it gets. Because pigmentation isn't driven by one gene. It's a network, MFSD12, OCA2, HERC2, SLC45A2, each with its own function, its own history. In Kenyan genomes, this complexity shows up more vividly than anywhere else. Multiple pigmentation alleles exist side by side, coexisting like dialects in a multilingual village. And here's the kicker. These combinations aren't random. They're the result of thousands of years of climate pressure, intermarriage, and adaptation. A population that lives in high UV zones needs more melanin. A population near the coast, historically exposed to different migratory waves, might carry genes for lighter tone. The skin adjusts but never forgets. Have you ever thought about how your skin knows where your ancestors lived? Not where they vacationed, not where they moved last decade, but where they survived, generation after generation. Your skin is an archive, and in Kenya, it's a volume packed with chapters the rest of the world barely understands. Because this country has hosted every kind of gene flow, Cushitic, Nilotic, Bantu, Arabian, Persian, and instead of replacing each other, these lineages merged, creating one of the most genetically complex pigmentation landscapes anywhere on the planet. This isn't just interesting, it's important. Medical science has long relied on narrow models based on European genetics. But in Kenya, where skin color varies even within a family, one-size-fits-all assumptions fall apart. Personalized medicine must reckon with this variation. It can't afford not to. And culturally, skin has carried weight, sometimes pride, sometimes prejudice. But genetically, it's neutral. It just wants to protect, to adapt, to survive. And the Kenyan genome has found multiple solutions to the same solar problem. That's what makes it beautiful, So the next time you see someone from Kenya, whether they have deep obsidian skin or a lighter tone passed through generations of coastal traders, remember this. They're not just the product of sunlight. They're the product of thousands of years of intelligent biological negotiation. Skin isn't just what we see. It's what we inherit. And in Kenya, it's been shaped by the sun, the soil, and the footsteps of ancestors crossing continents. What if we could rewind time? Not through fossils, not through ruins, but through blood. That's what a genome is. Not just a biological instruction manual. It's a time machine, quietly storing every migration, every adaptation, every survival act our ancestors ever pulled off. And nowhere does that time machine tick louder than in Kenya. Because here, the DNA isn't just diverse. It's ancient. It holds versions of humanity that don't exist anywhere else. Not in Europe, not in Asia, not even in nearby parts of Africa. Some of these lineages are so old, they predate agriculture. They remember a time when humans were still navigating survival with stone tools and firelight. You don't need a shovel to uncover history in Kenya. You just need a cheek swab. Let's talk discovery. In 2020, a groundbreaking genomic study sequenced over 400 high-coverage African genomes. Kenyan samples stunned researchers, millions of novel variants, never seen before in global databases. These weren't errors. They were missing chapters in the human genetic story. That's how underrepresented African, and especially East African, DNA has been. Now think about this. Every time a genome from Kenya is added to global reference panels, it doesn't just fill a gap. It changes the way diseases are understood, treatments are developed, and ancestry is interpreted worldwide. Kenya isn't just contributing to science. It's correcting it. Projects like the African Genome Variation Project and H3 Africa are doing something revolutionary. They're making African data visible. And not just any data. We're talking about ethnic groups like the Luya, Luo, Maasai, Kikuyu, each with distinct genetic footprints, each revealing clues to everything from malaria resistance to hypertension predisposition. And then there's ancient DNA. Despite the tropical climate, a few ancient skeletons in Kenya, some from pastoralist burials thousands of years old, have yielded viable DNA. What they reveal is staggering. These people shared ancestry with early Ethiopian herders, proving that migration wasn't a theory. It happened, and it left genetic fingerprints in modern communities. In some forager remains, researchers found mitochondrial haplogroups that are now nearly extinct, which means some of the people who once lived in Kenya left no trace but their DNA. That's what makes genomes powerful. They speak for those history forgot. And now, with modern tools, we can hear them. But the real magic? It's how ancient and modern DNA meet. By comparing old genomes to present-day Kenyans, scientists can track the dilution of hunter-gatherer ancestry, the rise of pastoralist lineages, and even the arrival of Eurasian gene flow through trade. It's like watching 10,000 years of history and fast-forward inside a single chromosome. Let that sink in. Imagine holding your saliva in a test tube, knowing it contains fragments of extinct populations, lost trade routes, and evolutionary gambles that paid off. In Kenya, this isn't fiction. It's daily research. The more scientists study Kenyan genomes, the clearer it becomes. Human history isn't linear. It's braided, it's interrupted, and it's deeply localized. What happened in the Lake Turkana Basin is not what happened on the Swahili coast. Each region, each ethnicity, each genome, its own museum of survival. So next time someone says, we're all connected, remind them, yes, but the map of that connection lives in Kenya. Because this isn't just a country. It's a repository of the earliest, deepest, and most dynamic genetic expressions in the world. Genomes here don't just hold ancestry. They preserve memory, molecular memory of who we were, who we became, and who we might be next.